Are we using the right one now? That's much better. The levels are much higher. Yes, tried to start recording this episode just now and found out that for some reason the computer decided to use the webcam microphone. Thankfully I figured that out because the levels were really low, but yeah, that would have been bad had I recorded the whole episode not doing it. So, hello and welcome back to The Lion's Den. I'm your host Matt, as always, and today we are discussing potentially two things, but I've got one thing on the mind, which is my trip to IKEA, or however you want to say it. So, funnily enough, I literally got back from my trip to IKEA 2 hours ago? No, about an hour and 10 minutes ago. Yeah. So we're recording this hot off the heels of my little adventure, and you might be thinking, what do you mean by IKEA adventure? Well, plain and simple, I have this week off, as I explained last week, hopefully. I just wanted to go to IKEA for the sake of it. I like doing little trips out where it requires driving for a small chunk of time, i.e. in this case about 35 minutes. It's just nice to kind of get out and go somewhere distant, I suppose, because I can, I've got a car. And I also thought IKEA's interesting enough and people like going there, so I thought maybe it'd be nice to go by myself. And I'd also seen online this little thing where if you've got multiple items on a surface, like on a desk or a bedside table, one way you can kind of make it look less cluttered is by putting everything onto trays, and then it tricks your brain into thinking that it's one item rather than several separate items. So that was the sort of semi-reason why I decided I would go to IKEA, was I thought, okay, I'll have a look for some trays. The drive down was fine. I used Google Maps, which I'm very accustomed to now, just driving with Google Maps. Although it took me on a really weird route, which I assume was to try and avoid traffic, but it ended up just making some situations slightly more awkward, like trying to get onto a massive 5-lane roundabout. That was mildly terrifying, but thankfully I figured out the traffic light pattern, so I figured when there was a small gap for me to go. But other than that, it was fairly uneventful getting there, and yeah. IKEA is very underwhelming and overwhelming at the same time, and for different reasons. It's overwhelming mainly because it's so disorientating once you're in there. Once you start walking around and going to the different sections and looking at the different sort of areas that they've built up with all of the items and whatnot, it's very confusing because none of it's in straight lines. It's all kind of bobbing and weaving and taking turns here, there, and everywhere. And the bizarre part is that you'll walk through maybe 4 or 5 different sections of it, and you'll pop out at an area with some windows back to the main car park, and when you eventually hit that area, you'll go, oh, that's where I am in relation to where I entered the building. That's not at all where I thought I was. It's very bizarre. And it's a maze-like building without being an actual maze. Although, to be fair, there are shortcuts, but only shortcuts between certain areas of the building, which are useful, but then also mildly inconvenient if you're not at any of those points. So, for example, the way they've listed it on their little map is 20 sections, and for example, you can cut between, say, section 1 and 9 to get to the cafe restaurant area, and you can cut between, say, 4 and 6, but that's it. There's no like, oh, I want to go from 3 to 18. You couldn't do that. So you kind of have to figure that out. And there are signs and signage around that say like, oh, here's the shortcut to X section, but unless that's the section you want to go to, it's not very useful. I'm slightly disappointed because I didn't utilize the cafe, mainly because I overestimated how long I thought I was going to be there. I thought this was going to be a day thing. I thought I was going to be there all day, and I'd be able to like stop halfway through and go to the cafe and have lunch and then finish up in the afternoon. If that was true, I wouldn't be recording this episode right now. But let me put it this way. I had something that I wanted to go and look for in the store, which I had no idea where it would be, for one thing, so I had to walk through the whole store, which was fine. 2, I walked through the whole store. And 3, I did stop at multiple areas. 1, to look through the items to see if they had the one I want, but also to try other things, such as comfy chairs for sitting in and reading and such, or office chairs. I had a look at some office chairs as well. And it still only took me an hour and 10 minutes to walk through the whole thing. And yes, I know I wasn't actually stopping and picking stuff up and going to purchase them, but ooh boy, I massively overestimated how long I was going to be there. Because I arrived at maybe 10 to 10 Cowboy time, if you know what that means. Good job. Obviously, I then got out my car, went walking around, and as I said, an hour and 10 minutes later, I pop out the other end. I found a little cafe bistro thing, which is basically a glorified sort of coffee shop stall style thing, not a real cafe slash bistro, whatever they might say on the map. I bought a very cheap 60p cinnamon roll, which was delicious, might I add you, and a cappuccino. I think it must have been 130, 135 for the cappuccino, which was also quite nice. A little bitter, but not too bad considering I'd had it with a sweet cinnamon roll. So that was quite nice, cheap coffee and a pastry. And I took that back to my car and sat in my car as it started to rain, which was kind of quite cozy, having a warm pastry and a hot coffee whilst sat in my car with the rain pitter-pattering on the roof. Very nice, but it was 11 o'clock. There was no way I was going to kill another 2 odd hours before 1 o'clock, which is when I roughly have lunch. And I thought it seems daft to sit here or to try and kill more time in IKEA. But this is a retail park, so what other shops are there around here that I could potentially have a look in? So I pulled out my phone, got Google Maps, because the way the car park is situated, one, it's on multiple sort of levels, but two, it's also got buildings in between the outer ring of buildings. So if you looked in one direction, it's very unlikely you'll get a clear line of sight to buildings on the other side of the lot. So I pulled out my phone, got Google Maps up and had a look at what stores there were around, and there were 3 notable stores. Well, number 1, a TK Maxx. Now that's notable because for the past, I don't know how long, I've been trying to find a pair of beige trousers to replace my current pair of beige trousers. Well, I have 2 pairs technically, so if I found 1 pair of beige trousers in a store, I'd buy 2 of them. Mainly because the pairs of beige trousers I have were slowly developing holes at the seam towards the crotch area, which is obviously not ideal. So number 1, I would go to TK Maxx to have a look at that. The second thing, there is a thing called Wilko. It used to be called Wilkinson, I believe, but there's a place called Wilko, which in the UK is a general purpose hardware store, I think is the best way to explain it. Or a general purpose kind of home store. Like the basic things you'll need to just kind of keep your house going. Like if you want paint, they've got paint. If you want picture frames, they've got that. If you want anchors for the wall to hang said pictures on, they've got that. They'll have kitchenware like knives and forks and dinner plates and pots and pans. They'll also have storage organizers, you know, that kind of stuff. So I thought, oh, maybe they'll have the sort of tray thing that I want to use to organize stuff at home. And then the third place, just because it was there and it's always a good time, is a Pets at Home, which is just a pet store. And they have both items for pets, but also live animals in the building, which is why I always go. Because what it means is you can walk into that store, have a look, say, for some items, for example, for our cat. I went and had a look at some of the scratching posts and some of the toys and such. But you can also go and have a look at the adorable little hamsters, the guinea pigs. Sometimes they have rabbits and rats and stuff. And you can also go have a look at the fish. They'll have live fish tanks and everything. And that's just always a good time. Looking at cute fluffy balls. Good stuff. Very glad I did that. So in order again, number 1, TK Maxx sadly did not have any of beige trousers. Nor did they have trench coats. That's another thing I really want, and this is going to sound stupid, but it's the best way to describe it. If you've seen Sherlock, the BBC programme I talked about a couple of weeks prior, he wears a trench coat that I basically want, and I cannot find that anywhere without it being like £100, which is stupid. I would pay maybe £35-40 for that kind of item, but I haven't found anywhere other than the upper echelons of male fashion, basically. So nothing in TK Maxx, sadly. I went into Wilko. Wilko did have some storage organizers, but they were slightly too deep and they were clear plastic, so I wasn't entirely sure if that was the ideal thing to pick up. But I will consider online shopping for them so I can get dimensions and such and try and figure out what might be useful. And then finally I went to Pets Home and was just trying not to go, ooh, all the way around because it was just adorable. The fish were hilarious. There was a couple tanks of fish that had, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 of them in one of those like little cubicle tanks. And they would just follow you. You could hover your hand or your finger just like a couple inches from the glass and then move it around, and this just cluster of fish, or school is the correct word, this school of fish would just follow your finger as if it was a guiding light to the promised land. It was hilarious, but it was also quite entertaining and a little bit scary because I was like, why are you doing this? Why? There were some also very pretty fish, some lovely colours, and some with very elaborate fin designs and such, which I think is interesting. You know, it's not functional, but it's pretty. Make of that what you will. They had a thing called a dwarf hamster, which they were these tiny little chubby hamsters of just pure fluff. They were so cute. I was melting at how adorable they were. They had like little chubby cheeks and small cute eyes, and so good. Sadly no rabbits. I do like rabbits because they just kind of, they hop around and they're so bouncy and fluffy. Oh, so good. They didn't have any rats either, which I would have been curious to see what they're like. Obviously different from wild rats. Pet rats, I assume, are very different. And they also had guinea pigs that were also quite energetic and adorable. So that was good. Good bit of dopamine. Very happy. I did have this small question to myself as I was walking home that I might try and Google is, in English, okay, so for context, like I say, I'm learning French. In English, if you want to differentiate between a pet animal and just the animal, you'd say, I would like a pet rat, for example. That was the main case I was thinking of. If you wanted to talk about a rat that's a pest or a wild rat, you'd just say rat. And if you want one to keep, you'd say a pet rat, right? Pet rats, right? Ooh. How would you say that in French? Because the word for pet in French is like 4 different words and it's crazy. So just kind of curious how you would differentiate that. Either way, I had a fun time. I didn't end up buying lunch at IKEA, which perhaps is for the best because it might have been really expensive. But otherwise, just a nice morning, and now I've got the afternoon to do whatever I want. I will probably just vegetate like a potato. Anyway, as always, I hope you've enjoyed listening. You know what to do. All the buttons are down below. Please press them aggressively with maximum prejudice. Slap those buttons. And I'll see you all next week. Bye.